Hey guys, HamsterwheelGaming here with a new video and welcome to episode 4 of the Underdogs of Raiding. Today we're gonna look at a class that is the Master of the Light, one that strikes down enemies with holy power and with the help of a big ass weapon. A favorite of many, but not favored by raiding guilds. I'm talking about the Retribution Paladin. As always, let's go back to 2004 where we find ourselves in the beginning stages of WoW Vanilla, where the story of the Retribution Paladin begins. During the early days of Vanilla, Paladins had these 3 trees to work with. Holy, which was aimed more towards healing, Protection, which was obviously aimed towards tanking, and then Retribution, which was aimed towards DPS. The talent tree in the beginning stage of the game was quite interesting, as Retribution Paladins had Blessing of Kings as their top tier talent tree. Quite a powerful buff that increased all stats by 10%. Few more things to notice here is that Consecration is part of the Retribution tree, not the Holy tree. Divine Strength was way deeper into the Holy tree, which meant you couldn't get that talent if you put at least 31 points in the Retribution tree. And Precision, which gave you 3% hit, was also in the Retribution tree, but required you to smack 5 points in Deflection, which would give you 5% chance to parry. It goes without saying, while everyone was still leveling, Paladins speccing as Retribution was pretty common, as that was pretty much the go-to spec for DPS. They did decent damage at that time, though ran out of mana quick, and like a warrior they were very gear dependent, else you did next to no DPS. Their Blessing of Kings meant that they did provide a very useful buff for a raid or a group, though during the early stages of Vanilla, many raiding guilds would rather have nothing but Holy Paladins and maybe just one Retribution Paladin, just so you could get that King's buff. Unfortunately, for the majority of the Retribution Paladins in Vanilla, they were only able to do PvP and a few dungeons here and there. Well, that, and one of the many Paladins out there got to solo Lord Kazakh by stacking Reckoning on himself for hours upon hours, so yeah, that happened. Oh, by the way, that was fixed within 24 hours though, so it was a one-shot kind of deal, and I seriously doubt they would ever have something like this in the future classic WoW servers. In the later stage of Vanilla WoW, Paladins were still a very rare sight, as back then people still had the whole you go holy or you don't get to raid mentality. However, on Vanilla private servers, things are not the way they used to be. Retribution Paladins have been popping up here and there, and people have shown that they do have a lot of potential. I mean, think of Esfand, Drakova, E-Tech TV, the list goes on and on. So how are they able to make it work? Surely it's not as simple as it looks like, right? Well, that's true, and I'm not exactly the right person to explain all this, as I never raided as one in Vanilla. But fear not, because I have found someone who's able to help me out here. You might not know him right now, but after some explaining and some footage, you'll probably remember the name. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Pudgy.
Hi everyone, my name is Pudgy and I'm playing a Retribution Paladin on the Vanilla server Nostalgeek. About my Vanilla background, in 2005 I used to play a Holy Paladin. I switched to Shaman at the next expansions, that's to say TBC and Wrath of the Lich King. A year ago I decided to roll a Paladin to get my revenge about the stigma attached to that class when it comes to DPS. I am currently raiding in Astramass and part of the 40-man roster leading us to the 10th boss. Why did my guild keep me in their raids as a Red Paladin? Basically cause I push it to the limits every single raid I do, although they are open-minded to hybrid classes too. If you maximize and optimize your hybrid class with the right consumables, gameplay, dedication and stuff, that will make you viable. Remember that viable is quite different from optimal in high-level PvE. As I mentioned it in some of my videos, raiding as a Red Paladin in Vanilla is highly expensive. Flask of Supreme Power, Mongoose, Giants, Intelligence, Arcane, Juju Power, Roids, Fire Power, Shadow Oil, Well-Fed Buff, Mage Blood, Dark Runes, Mana Potion, Immolation, Fire Water, the list goes on. Plus, extra capital world buffs are king and key to defeat problematic bosses like Promagus or Patchwork, for instance. Remember, you are limited to 32 buffs in vanilla, just choose the appropriate ones. My specificity is that I'm playing with a lot of procs, such as the 2 trinkets that scales with spell damage and proc on your swing, seal of command and judgment. They can also crit and scales with debuffs on the target. Pretty sick, huh? Naturally, End of Rag helps a lot to get to that point, and once again its fireball proc scales good with Scorch and spell damage. Likewise, Shadow Oil takes the Warlock Shadow Ball debuff. Keep in mind that those can be resisted or doubled where the bosses have vulnerability debuffs. Still, that gameplay is only affordable once you get the full AQ40 Avenger set. Before that level, gearing up as wall adding might be more profitable and suitable. I definitely recommend you guys to begin with the Untamed Blade, drops on Razor. The 300 strength proc is just insane. I've always managed to get a top 10 DPS while equipping that weapon. Otherwise, the Unstoppable Force or weapons that drop on Ragnaros or BWL bosses are good values, even the one on Akar. And the basic trinkets to equip are the 2% crit black end plus End of Justice. Then go for the Heart of Talak and the Maelstrom card. To maximize your chance to rock in PvE, ask your red leader to join a group composed of a Fury Warrior, a Hunter, and a Feral Tread to benefit from their class buffs. Judging Crusader on the target is a must-have to increase your personal DPS. Unfortunately, it takes a debuff slot among the 16 available. So better judge mana for your red, cause yes, this will be your only big one reason to bring something useful to your mates. Talking about spell damages, to me it plays a huge role with that gameplay and even more in Naxxramas. Thanks to Exorcism, which takes for instance 43% of the spell damage, or spells such as Divine Wrath. I have myself more than 400 spell power in red, for instance. In many fights, the main tank 3 or 4 can add even more value by hitting the target with Nightfall, which boosts a part of your DPS. Even though to have been told to equip that weapon if you are willing to raid as Red Paladin in most of vanilla guilds. A last say, well, always monitor your threat meta. Don't give up on playing an RNG class and prove skeptical people they were wrong. Or not. And that's it for now. I'm planning to replace End of Rag by the Corrupted Upspringer when the 4 Horsemen will be defeated. There are so many things to discuss that I've probably skipped some of them. That's why I invite you guys to debate in the comment section below. I'd be delighted to answer. I'd like to thank Hamsterwheel for the invitation, and keep it up, buddy. Cheers!
And thank you very much for that, Pudgy. If anyone here is interested in this content, you can check out the link in the description below this video. Anyway, time to wrap up the vanilla era. To put it simple, yes, you can raid as a Retribution Paladin, but it goes without saying that you have to put in a lot of work to make it work. But if you do, you'll have a chance of proving everyone wrong and showing the world that you can swing the light like no other. And then we arrive at the Burning Crusade era of World of Warcraft, and this is where things really started to look up for Paladins. Here's the talent tree that Paladins had in that expansion, and the later talents in the tree were really focused to buff the damage of the Paladins to the extent where they could finally be viable in raids. Sanctified Seals gave you 3% crit chance with melee attacks and spells, Fanaticism gave you a massive 15% extra crit chance for judgments, and then we have Crusader Strike. One of the things Paladins missed was an extra attack, where they get to do a bit more in terms of melee attacks, and Crusader Strike was here to deliver. It did 110 weapon damage and refreshed all the judgments of the target, which definitely came in handy. Oh yeah, we have to talk about Avenging Wrath, a cooldown that increases all damage done by 30% for 20 seconds. And it only had a 3-minute cooldown. I know Shamans probably got the coolest buff, which was Bloodlust, But Avenging Wrath wasn't too shabby either, and it meant a huge DPS increase for any Paladin, plus it gave you angel wings. Oh yeah, it was that cool. Another thing that really helped Paladins was the availability of gear. Burning Crusade is well known for offering way more gear and being much more flexible in terms of itemization, with gems for instance. This meant that any Paladin had a good to fair chance to get some solid gear before hitting entry level raids like Karazhan. Like I said before, just like the warrior, Paladins were very dependent on gear, and because there was a much wider availability of gear, they finally had enough tools to do some proper DPS. So, speaking of DPS, how did things fare for the Retribution Paladins in the Burning Crusade? Well, I'll be honest, they weren't exactly topping meters. In the beginning stage of the game, they were still lacking behind a decent geared Fire Mage or Elemental Shaman, but make no mistake, if played properly, they were definitely capable of pulling their own weight, especially if they were backed up by a Shaman's Wind Fury Totem. Which, by the way, was the most satisfying thing ever as a melee class. Wind Fury Totem after Burning Crusade was changed where it only gave you extra haste. But before that, it would give everyone in that group the actual Wind Fury effect, meaning you would have a 20% chance to get 2 extra attacks with additional attack power. Matter of fact, it was so awesome that any hardcore raiding guild made sure they always had an enhancement shaman in their melee group, which really gave the Retribution Paladin a massive DPS boost. In the later stages of raiding, Paladins were kinda left behind by certain specs that stacked really well with gear, which I also mentioned in previous episodes. Unfortunately, seeing a Paladin topping the meters was kind of a rare sight, as Shadow Destrolock simply had a much higher damage output compared to an equivalent geared Retribution Paladin. Make no mistake though, because if you did have an enhancement shaman in your group with Wind Fury Totem, a Retribution Paladin's damage was nothing to laugh at. If played well, with the right gear, they were definitely able to pull their own weight in raids and give a lot of other DPSers a good run for their money. The Burning Crusade was a great expansion for anyone who loved their Retribution Paladin and dreamt of raiding as one. They've been told over and over again that it simply wasn't viable. The negative stigma prevented many Retribution Paladins of ever stepping foot into a single raid in vanilla. Yet here they are, kicking ass and taking names. The only thing they really missed though was decent AoE abilities, as Consecration just didn't do a whole lot and Retribution Paladins were often embarrassed during AoE packs by almost any other class. But fear not, because Blizzard realized this, and things were about to change for the better. And now we arrive at the second expansion of the game, Wrath of the Lich King. In this era of the game, Paladins had this talent tree to work with. Now, Wrath of the Lich King is well known for making AoE much stronger and something that players would do a lot more in dungeons and raids. This is one of the reasons the top talent for Paladins was Divine Storm, an instant weapon strike that cost 110% weapon damage to up to 4 enemies, and it healed nearby friendly players as well. Combine that with Consecration and you got yourself some pretty nice AoE DPS. They also reworked Exorcism, where before you could only use it against undead mobs, you can now use it against any mob or player, and with 2 talents in the Art of War, it even became an instant cast if you landed a critical melee hit. All in all, things were looking good for the Paladin, and they were finally able to not only do good single target damage, but also do good AoE damage. Later in the game, Paladins definitely got a jump in damage after they managed to get 2 pieces of tier 10, which gave you a 40% chance to reset your cooldown on one of your main damage abilities, Divine Storm. It's been a long time coming. For years the Retribution Paladins were laughed at, but now they finally had all the tools they needed to be a serious contender on the damage meters. They may have had humble beginnings, but people have shown that with the right attitude, skill, and willingness to put in time and effort into the spec, you can make it work. You can be part of the other DPSers, and above all, show them that these mighty warriors of the light are not meant to be taken lightly. And there you go, people, episode 4 of the Underdogs of Raiding. This was kind of a tough one for me as I had little knowledge about the Paladin class myself, but it was fun doing research, leveling my own character on Gamer District, gearing that up, getting acquainted with the class, and finding out all the cool quirks which made them able to take part in the DPS race in all 3 expansions. It goes without saying that I wouldn't have been able to make this episode if it wasn't for other people helping me out, including Pudgy, obviously, Esvant, Shepard, and a few other random people I looked up guides from or spoke on private servers. And last but not least, I want to thank you for watching this video. I'll be back with another episode soon, but until then, I'm HamsterwheelGaming and have a good one.